Recording now. So welcome to this session, which is the last session of our Liviana conference. In this session, we will be hearing from Alison and Ignacio, and I think also people from the community will be present and they may also speak, although I'm not sure about the way you work that out. But this is a session that will be presenting the work that the community Lafkenche Mapuche people is doing in Chile with, or in collaboration with, Alison Guzman and Ignacio Krell. And the session will be held in English, even though we know we do have some people who speak other languages. In case you feel that you need to use your own language for whatever purpose that is, just go ahead. Si tienen que usar su propio idioma para decir algo o presentar algún punto de vista, pueden hacerlo, por supuesto, because we have people who can translate back and forth. Tenemos gente que puede traducir, así que, por ejemplo, tenemos Bianca que puede traducir del italiano a otras lenguas, y I think Nicole can go from French to English, so whatever is needed that way, we can do it that way. Creo que Fernando también puede traducir del Mapuche al castellano, y así, so on and so forth. So I will pasar la palabra, paso palabra to Alison, so you can get started, and my role here is to make sure that everything goes smoothly, and if Alison and Ignacio need help, I can provide that. But if not, I will not be speaking because I'm here because I'm interested, of course, and also because I am in a support role from the point of view of the conference committee. We also have Kat McKinnon here with us, who's been key in making possible the conference, so gracias. And so paso palabra so we can thank the peoples of the earth and get started. Gracias.
Thank you, Ana. Gracias. Chatumay. Mari Compuche, Mari Pulamien. That is how we greet here in Mapuche ancestral lands in Mapudungun. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, morning, wherever you are in the part of the world, to be a part of our discussion linked to our work with Mapuche-Lafkenche communities, people of the sea, of Lake Budi, coastal region of the Araucanía here in northern Patagonia, Chile, where we are based. We have been so happy to meet many of you and participate in this rich dialogue of community economies in the Liviana conference these past couple of weeks. And at several sessions, we have found relevant intersections with how our focus and concerns as action researchers, including thinking with community economies with Professor Catherine Gibson, making the Bamboo Bridge with Catherine, also Juan Francisco and their team, the birthing work, the collective labor of childbirth with Catherine McKinnon and Stephen Healy, Nowtopia, the film with Thomas Smith and Nadia Johannisova, the community economy teaching and research sessions coordinated by Anissa Madden, exploring the intersections of economic practices and other than humans with Galina Caillo and Eva Houtbeckers, among others. Thank you so much for organizing. We loved getting to know you all and learning more of your work. A cross-cutting theme we found during Liviana have been the pressing need to overcome oversimplified binaries between old and new, small and global, human and non-human, earth others, the collective, academy and communities of practice, among the more central issues, and we look forward to continuing these conversations and to materializing bridges in practice. As Ana mentioned, my name is Alison Guzman, co-founder of Maple Chile with my partner Ignacio Krell, who will be joining me in this presentation. We can use the title and its terms to pose the following questions. What do we mean by Indigenous-led? What is economic co-design? What is it to coexist with Earth? And how can the Apoyo Mutuo offer a vantage point into the evolving intersection between the three? We have a lot to say at this time, a very profound and lengthy experience in the field we've had and are still having. So we will try to ground it as best as we can without hopefully oversaturating you. and also to leave enough time in the second half of this session for an open discussion on the issues posed.
Hi everyone. In what follows, we will elaborate possible answers to these inquiries around or based on our experience and hopefully yours as well. In ours, indigenous leadership has stemmed from the ability of the community under their own decision-making protocols to set the terms and conditions of their invitation and continued collaboration within this hybrid collective with us, to use the concept elaborated by community economists, scholar activists, well, in which we have participated as allies and co-designers. In our case, being invited by the Lafkenche community encompasses placing ourselves under indigenous authorities, protocols, and rights, and crucially, agreeing on an exit strategy, meaning enabling self-management, which is autogestión in Spanish, and thus avoiding creating new dependencies. Indigenous-led co-design, meanwhile, we have come to see as a specific form of action research that may offer a vantage point to learn from while supporting indigenous economies and agencies as they move forward to rebuild survivance in the Anthropocene. But first of all, we would like to acknowledge again that the Mapuche people and the Yaguepuyi community, or LOF, are the main actors of the story we are about to tell you. I would like to honor them by reading a quote from Jorge Calfuqueo, who is Yaguepuyi's Lonco, or traditional leader. Living in the LOF, living in community, is what this is all about. Everything revolves holistically. It all intersects. It is not biased or fragmented. It might be fragmented, but at the same time, it makes a whole. So this quote you can also find in the report we shared earlier with you by email, which is a piece of research we conducted, commissioned by community leaders as a fundamental step to initiate a broader diffusion of the mutual learning process we will now share with you. I'd like also to thank the very meaningful participation today of Lamien, or sister Nadia Bainefil Puriqueo. And I don't know if Peñi Fernando Quilaqueo Calfuqueo is around, but I think he is, or he will. They are community managers and young leaders who have been involved in this process at different moments in the last several years. They are learning English, so we hope they can participate and generously share their viewpoints on the process during the second half of this session. La mía Nadia, no sé si Peñi Fernando está por ahí, acabo de agradecerles y explicar, bueno, que vamos a hacer esta sesión en inglés, que ustedes están aprendiendo este lenguaje, así que ojalá puedan también participar y sobre todo poder, digamos, entregar algunos de sus puntos de vista en la segunda parte de la sesión.
Okay, thank you, Ignacio. So I wanted to tell everyone a little bit about our story and our involvement as allies to this process. Ignacio and I began dialogues in 2012 with the community of Yaguepuyi while being in Oregon. And having myself a background in international development and international studies with a master's in ethics, peace, and global affairs, I was excited of this opportunity to embark on this journey with Ignacio, a sociologist who had worked with Mapuche communities for over 10 years at the time, and who was finishing his environmental master's program at the University of Oregon. And it was through his thesis work, he had stayed in touch with Mapuche leaders regarding their need for developing tools for economic self-management. As it turned out, we began dialogues with key Mapuche leaders at a distance through Skype, keeping in mind the need to apply Mapuche protocols as best as we can in our communications. In time and with the support of Maple Microdevelopment, we submitted a proposal of a project design to the community of Yayipui that addressed their aspiration to co-design a community-led financial tool, to which they agreed. So in 2013, we packed our bags and we left for Lago Budi. And with the support of our main funders, the Bay and Paul Foundations and First Peoples Worldwide, Keepers of the Earth Fund, we co-founded the Maple Chile program here in Southern Chile in collaboration with our community partners of Lago Budi, now 3 of the 9 communities that form the traditional governance structure there. And in addition to becoming connectors to a broad network of collaborators, including the CER network, to which we joined last year. So now going back to the protagonist, the Yayipui community, we wanted to show you a film we had created a few years back on the community-led financial model in its pilot stages, and now known as the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo KUUN. We thought to share the following video as a way for you to experience directly as best through virtual and introduce you to the Mapuche community in Lago Budi, to their voices, their faces, their expressions, and their lands. We thought to share here via Zoom. Now, it seems that it would be better to share the link through the chat, and we can convene and come back at let's say in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. How does that sound for everyone? Okay, so let me, let's see if we can paste the link in the chat.
It's the first thing in the chat, or no?
It's a...
Okay. Let me see.
Because I'm in...
Here, I can put it in. Oh, you did it already. Okay.
All right, so the link should be in the chat, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes, 26 past the hour. or just ask everyone.
Okay. So while I think everyone is coming back, just very briefly mention that this was a video made a few years ago about the beginning of the process. I think it was in 2014. And we hope to be showing a second video later on this presentation that is more updated, and you will be able to see a little bit of the possibly the evolution of the process. But also I wanted to comment that both videos were produced by a local Mapuche-Lafkenche filmmaking crew, and actually school. It's the School of Communications of the Lago Budi, of the territory of Budi, who have been partnering with us in this process all along. So thank you to them as well. And yeah, if you have any questions, I bet you have we bet that you have a lot of questions by now. We hope that through the presentation we may be answering some of those. So we will have a moment in about 10 minutes from now. We will make a small pause to open up to question and answers and comments. So we invite you to hold on to your questions. At least someone has a very specific question about the film itself. You're welcome to speak now.
Hi, yeah, I'm trying to get to the next slide. Okay. So since the beginning of the project, we used international frameworks as a legal backing to protect us and the community. For those who may not know the region, the Mapuche people have been struggling for their lands and identities and speaking about the issue of Mapuche autonomy, and this has not looked favorably by the Chilean state. As we know, perhaps not all of the international conventions are necessarily useful in that they are difficult to implement as they are non-binding, but at least we were provided with an important support to abide and strengthen the role of traditional authorities and create community cohesion through the indigenous rights and cultural framework. The challenge was how to apply international frameworks in practice for indigenous self-management and autonomy. Specifically, we acknowledged the ILO Convention 169 on the right to free, prior, and informed consent, and a special focus on the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 4, which states that Indigenous peoples in exercising their right to self-determination have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to their internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. I wanted to open up our conversation to decolonizing methodologies. As Linda Tuhiwai-Terina Smith points out in her book, Decolonizing Methodologies, Research in Indigenous Peoples, research is a problematic concept, especially in an Indigenous context. She claims that the word research is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. Slightly uncomfortable for us researchers and hard to swallow, but a concept we must own and take responsibility for. Over the last couple of decades, the voice of quote unquote, the subject in this case of First Nations is emerging as an empowered agent. Drawing upon my recent museum studies at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Santa Fe, New Mexico, where decolonizing museums is a part of the history and methodology for Native communities. As we all know, the practice of research as well as museology stemmed from an elitist colonial origin where interpretation of knowledge was defined from select few. Though valuable in documenting history, indeed a crevice was created where the knowledge of the quote unquote other slipped away, dissipated, or dissolved into oblivion. For example, we can draw on this polarization in the museum field where First Nations began to take a stronger stance in exercising their voice to manage their own history and cultural patrimony. The creation of decolonized space is dependent on curation and the design of what to include in that space to tell a new story. I link this to my work of Indigenous-led co-design, taking space, overcoming space, decolonizing space, just as decolonizing economies refers to a concept of territoriality and creating of boundaries. I think this is happening as well in the global economic framework, where more and more indigenous communities are participating in the conversation of what it means to have autonomous economies. When it comes to indigenous-led co-design in the Lago Budi region, for example, I like to think this is linked to the same concept, that of economic space. The creation of economic space, for instance, is dependent on the design of telling a new story of economic empowerment and creating a new voice. If we think of indigenous-led co-design as the practice of decolonizing indigenous economic space, it is almost as if the local alternative economy was already alive, but it needed to be unveiled through the creation of space, curation and inventory, if you will. As an action researcher, my question is, how can indigenous-led co-design be used as a valuable tool to decolonize such space, in this case, a community economy? Could combining tools developed through action research with that of traditional and contemporary economic practices lead to alternative ways of making an economy? Diverse economies is a big part of community economy theory. What does diversity mean? Perhaps diversity can be referenced to different localities and models, but can it also be linked to diverse epistemologies and degrees of survivance? If diversity is essential in creating global sustainability to combat global capitalism and extractivism, I'd like us to explore the idea that perhaps indigenous-led co-design can be used as a tool to harness decolonizing agency into creating even further diverse community economies. In other words, communities exercising their decolonizing rights, whether it be the African-American communities in the United States, the religious minorities in conflict zones, or feminist movements, all these have certain concepts of survivance, a concept I picked up from the Anishinaabe theorist and writer Gerald Disner, who offers this framework for understanding Native survival and resistance. These spaces of tense survivance forces, and at the same time diverse, may contribute to the community economies conversation on diverse economies and create power not only for diverse alternative economies, but that of their survivance as well.
Okay. So thank you, Alison, for that great approach to decolonization. Before we go into the story of Apoyo Mutuo, and so we can fully grasp how it has opened a space for learning about rebalancing indigenous economies, and more specifically, their monetary and non-monetary components, we have to situate ourselves in the Lago Budi, the traditional Mapuche-Lafkenche territory, where the Apoyo Mutuo process takes place, and acknowledge the uniqueness of its territoriality by sharing a bit about its environmental history. The historical Lago Budi territory covers an extensive and ecologically rich coastal area of the Pacific northern Patagonia, today's south and central Chile, filled with exuberant coastal wetlands and formerly covered with mega diverse primary Valdivian forests, temperate forests, of which nowadays we can only find precious remnants. Lafkenche communities of Budi, as most Mapuche communities, have created and recreated agroecological ensembles at several crucial points since the arrival of Europeans. Their original economies, based on an extensive and light occupation of pristine lands, combined with a small-scale cultivation, first changed when it incorporated cattle raising and farming techniques from Europeans, which paradoxically became the economic base of a successful 300-year resistance to colonization. When finally modern Chilean and Argentinian armies invaded during the second half of the 19th century, the Mapuche landscape including its ancient forests, were very much intact, and their economies, to that point, still strong and vibrant. This changed dramatically, however, as the Mapuche lost control, not only political, but also social, cultural, and technological, over the changes that were from then on imposed to them by the dominant society. Survivors were forced to become subsistent peasants in the small communal lands left to them after the invasion and settlement of their territory. 2 or 3 generations after that, overimposed to this fragile peasant economy, the so-called Green Revolution had a profound impact, not only in their ability to conserve soils, forests, water, and biodiversity, but also in their relation with the dominant economy, marked from then on by incremental financial, technological, and cultural dependency. Fragmentation of landscapes and social fabric was aggravated in the last 40 years by penetration of extractive industries, enclosure and privatization of commons, and the subdivision of remaining communal lands. In the picture, you can see, for instance, erosion caused by deforestation and intensive agriculture in Budi. All this said, a powerful cross-cutting counter-trend of cultural resistance and resembling of agroecological livelihoods has enabled the permanence and revitalization of non-monetized practices and commoning as essential components of Mapuche territoriality. Non-monetary economic relations have shaped Mapuche territories and everyday lives, now entwined with the monetized market economy. From labor exchange and sharecropping, to ceremony and traditional medicine, to community mobilization to recuperate lands, as well as cultural control over education, cultural management, and environmental and development programs and regulations. It is from within this local context of dynamic socio-environmental change, shaped by loss and recomposition, that we can acknowledge that taking back the Mapuche economy is entwined with opening new paths for agroecological recomposition of indigenous territoriality under evolving conditions of Anthropocene.
And within this context, I would like to take you through the next slides a little bit more of our process. We undertook to co-design the Apoyo Mutuo tool jointly with the Yaguapuy community. From there, we will take a small break for questions and answers, and then continue to finish with a second half of the presentation with what we think are the most relevant learning points emerging through the co-design process. Here we see a picture of Lamien Nadia, who was appointed by the community along with another Lamien, Fresia, who's not with us in the Zoom, to join Ignacio and I to form the participatory action research team. She's pointing out the top needs or priorities of the community members and values identified through a small survey we conducted in 2013 using self-made cards. By analyzing the context, we were able to identify the needs and strengths, including assets of the community. In addition to the creation of the action research team, together we began to create the foundation for us to begin creating this alternative economic space, including that of the formation of a traditional governance structure composed of community leaders or council that have accompanied us throughout the process. By analyzing the community's needs and values, in addition to responding to the guidance of traditional authorities, together we began designing the financial mechanisms appropriate to the community context. As our relationships were gaining mutual trust and transparency in the beginning months living in the community, the importance of social carriers emerged. In other words, the role of the visionary leaders and families creating cohesion was taking place with a level of solemnity that occurred because of it. In parallel, we moved forward with a legal study with a Mapuche lawyer, which led to agreed upon bylaws amongst the founding members to document a central role of Mapuche authorities as ministers of faith for the Apoyo Mutuo. And finally, 2014, after a year of living in the community, analyzing and setting up the context, the founding members submitted their first deposits with their savings to form their savings. In this model, we also incorporated the concept of external members, in this case, Ignacio and myself in this first cycle, where we could save with a group but not take out loans. The first assembly consisted in the disbursement of community savings-based loans for a period based on the yearly agricultural cycle. And so the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo was formed, a community-managed tool financing their autonomous functions.
So since this first annual cycle, Alison just described, and through the last 6 years of operations, the Apoyo Mutuo model has consolidated, interlinked, as we will see, with actions to support agroecology and environmental restoration. The management team has rotated, incorporating new community managers to the learning processes, and who are currently striving to develop a fair trade interface between community and market economies. In the last few months, Apoyo Mutuo has also developed a COVID response strategy in the service of its members by providing a market space to exchange their produce and to purchase items they do not produce in the community, like cleaning supplies. In addition, they are fabricating organic biostimulant for gardening based on fermented algae, shown also in the picture, and which they are starting to distribute among community members with a minimum margin, which they hope will help cover costs and create incentives for the team. So up to this point, we have described how this mutual learning process may have looked alike for community members that have been able to appropriate their own economic systems, technologies, and financial governance structures. And in the second part of the presentation, we would like to go deeper into what we have learned as a hybrid collective, as we think this might be offer relevant insight for CERN and other community economists, scholars, and practitioners. But before we do that, we would like to open up a brief time of maybe 5 to 10 minutes for receiving some of your comments and questions, if there might be. So please feel free to intervene through the chat or directly through the camera, if you have any questions or comments so far.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Bronwyn. Thank you so much for the presentations and all the, it's fascinating. I'm a member of Community Economies Research Network and teach in a law school. And so my question was about the legal side, which isn't always, I found it fascinating to hear the way in which the international legal framework was useful. I understand exactly what you were saying about the tension between making it really practically useful at the level of the community around the vision of autonomy and so on. I think what I was wondering was it useful in relation to external actors? So you described the kind of nuances of how it was useful and the limits of that for the indigenous community. But was it useful? You sort of implied that it was useful in relation to almost holding off other people who might otherwise invade the autonomy, or like, did it actually I can't imagine it could have been used directly against the Chilean state, or maybe it is helpful in that respect. But any other external uses of
thank
that?
you, Bronwyn. I'm not a lawyer, neither is Ignacio, but we'll attempt to answer that question as best as we can. I think it served to create a sense of support. When we learned that this specific article existed, just the fact that it existed and it was being monitored by the international framework, international community, that in itself was enough to demonstrate a path in the ability to exercise this specific right. In a context like the one we were in, access to such international frameworks and information is difficult. The ILO Convention 169 was barely starting to be used and become aware amongst the Mapuche peoples of their rights, even for their rights to free and prior and informed consent. So being able to kind of jump out of the I guess the Chilean concept of law and access other ways or other conventions that serve indigenous communities proved to be empowering. That said, of course, sometimes the international conventions are rather watered down and are not prioritized by the national government structures. But however, over the years, over the past 6 to 7 years, we have noticed the certain shifts occurring, certain awareness building around international frameworks and conventions that have been applied by the Chilean government, but efectivamente in English, when we began this project, that was not the case. So a lot had changed actually over the last 5 to 6 years with regards to understanding what the rights are of the indigenous peoples here in southern Chile. I don't know, Ignacio, if you want to compliment me on that, and if we're answering your question.
Very briefly, in this matter, just say that it was useful also for when we discussed with this Mapuche lawyer, Nicolás Huichalaf, and the members and leaders of the community, their very specific concern was to not to be encroached by regulatory agencies from the Chilean government regarding this savings and loans situation. The study that we made basically shed light in that they had a right. They had a right under the international framework to develop their own institutions. So that was a big, as Alison said, a big sensation of being backed and not to worry about this possible encroachment by the government, which actually never happened. So far they haven't had any attempt of regulatory agencies or anything to meld into this tool.
Thank you so much. No, that's fine. I'm actually much more interested in the what you're saying from not a lawyer's perspective, and it's very it's sort of multi-layered, strange kind of legal pluralism almost. That's quite encouraging. Thank you.
There's one more question.
Yeah, I believe so here's a question from Kelly. Kia ora from New Zealand. Kia ora. Loved your thoughts on the interactions between indigenous economies and community and diverse economies. I'm interested in how useful Linda's work, Decolonizing Methodologies, was in the process. Start point, what adaptations? Thank you, Kelly. And frankly, I was afraid of that question because we did use this reference when we first began this project. And from what I remembered, it was gathering different perspectives and lens of the role of the action researcher and what that entailed in conversation of basically going into a territory or a community or a space that was not one's own. So one had to be exceptionally, empathetic and aware of the other, quote unquote. Her framework was useful in the sense that it kind of broke, or it was very different from the typical action research methodologies that are applied in other schools, I guess, to put schools of thought. And since she's the grandmother of decolonizing methodologies, she's kind of paving the way towards, this conversation. I'm sure a lot more has been written afterwards. And I would love to know if you've learned or if you are applying the same concept in your work. I know you're working with the Maori in New Zealand. And if you found adaptations in this regards. I think in practice, what we ended up doing was just starting, once the trust was built with the community, from there on, it kind of, our approach kind of took its own life form, its own entity. But it was useful to refer to Linda's work prior to the beginning, when we even while we were in Oregon, actually. So I hope that answers your question. And again, I would love to know from you and your understanding of this process.
So I will try to answer some of the other questions very briefly. Anairas asked, how we came to frame the role of external members and how is this implemented. And basically, very briefly, maybe we will come back to it, but it's about pulling resources from outside the community, but often it's also not, right now, there are many external members that are community members that have migrated to the cities, and they can save with the group, but they don't have the same benefits than the local members. Basically, that's it, and it's a way to augment or increase the funds available. I think we might come back to this later on. Should I continue?
Sure, not to worry, yeah.
Okay, so the question.
Anna, no sé si Anna has something to say she wanted to say. Anna, did you have something you wanted to say? I saw your little box light up.
Yeah, I just said that what Ignacio just said is enough, because he wants to move on to the different topics, and I said thank you. That's fine. Gracias.
So the Catherine asks about funding of the project, and we have been lucky to have a continued and incremental support from the Bay and Paul Foundations, a very flexible kind of support that has enabled us to dedicate a good chunk of our time to this through several periods in the last few years. There's also some important resources going to the community in different manners through these projects, especially in what has to do with the agroecological component that we will look further. And in terms of how we frame these relationships with funders, you mentioned the issue of well-being. And yes, there is a translation. Translation has been a key issue and continues to be. We will come back to this in the next part of our presentation, but there is a key concept in Mapuche culture about well-being or good life, which is kumemongeleal, which means literally good living, and has to do with basically coexistence with others in the community, including non-humans. I think that would be okay, Alison.
And with regards to the Take Back the Economy Spanish version that Jenny asked, we happened to come across that copy when on one of Catherine Gibson's world trips to, well, this time she went to Santiago with Stephen Healy, and there we participated in their first climate Change Conference, or the KCCA. And they had these Spanish copies available and we met the translator and got it signed by Catherine and Stephen, and a couple of years later we joined the CERN. But so that's how we came across the book. Catherine had it with her when she came to Chile a few years ago. I'm not sure, maybe Anna might know, I'm not sure if there's where we can get a Spanish version.
You mean if people want to get the Spanish version? Yeah, well, we can talk about that later if people are interested. Maybe we can, if people are interested in the Spanish version, they can communicate with me. Si alguien tiene interés en la versión en español, se puede comunicar conmigo o con Alison o Ignacio y después lo vemos como para no usar el tiempo, so as not to take the time now.
There's another question about funding and the role of intergovernmental agencies. Again, we have general support from independent foundations, not so much from the intergovernmental system, really, to be very honest. And I think that we can continue, Alison. What do you think? If there's not more questions. Okay. Yes.
My question was separate to the project you have done. Have there been any previous encounters with projects funded by other organizations that the communities you were working with ever mentioned? Was that the case, or were they completely not impacted by other kinds of projects?
Yeah, there was important funding and interest in these communities in the 80s during the dictatorship, but then there was a big withdrawal of all the big NGOs during the 90s as Chile supposedly moved into being a developing or almost developed country, I don't know, and it was presented as an exemplar transition to democracy and a growing economy. So there was a big withdrawal of all kinds of international support. And today, the main actor really in the area is the government. They do have several development programs, agricultural programs, working in a very sort of hierarchical, conventional fashion, and they are often, in our opinion at least, and the leaders we work with, more for a part of the problem than of the solution, really. But very little presence of international actors, except, I would say, for us, at least in this particular area.
Okay, so I'm moving forward here. Thank you for your wonderful questions. These are great. And we'll be finishing up the second part and then opening it up for discussions. So I would like to resume this part focused on what we see as relevant contributions to the community economies framework. Often many mistakenly interpret indigenous societies as stagnant and representative of a past. And as much as this is an ongoing internal search and debate of identity to which we don't want to attempt to address or answer, we do think it is important to acknowledge the reconceptualization of indigenous economies, in this case through the lens of the Apoyo Mutuo process since 2013. In other words, whereas indigenous forms of economies were once idealized by the West, such as barter and trade, gathering, respect of the common, suddenly through the lens of decolonizing economies, these approaches and methodologies can become reactivated and honored, and in other instances, innovated. Ways of indigenous economic thought and practice that once lay dormant is merging now with the flow of quote unquote new knowledge and practice that are not necessarily imposed to create meaningful dialogue in an evolving relationship-based economy so relevant in our times. Although it is much more complex and dynamic than what appears here on the screen, I try to simplify this local economic context as much as I can through the categories of the traditional on one hand and the contemporary on the other of Mapuche economic practices. As I mentioned, this can be analyzed forever, but in reality, we wanted to show the importance of addressing the multifaceted aspects of indigenous-led economies and all that this encompasses, including the contemporary. So briefly, I will read you the list. Examples of the traditional include traditional governance, LOF or community territory shared with Itrofi Mongen, which is interdependent diversity of life, Kumemongelea, which is good living through land-based livelihoods, Tarkintu, which is a gift exchange, reciprocity. Wait, I'll just keep going, but I hear someone, I think. Reciprocity, which is Rekuluun or mutual support. Shared access, which is the commoning of the Itrofi Mongen, and Mingako, which are collective works, and Medieria, which is a labor exchange or sharecropping. That was all the examples of traditional economic practices that are still being practiced today, and of contemporary economic practices that are also context-based and cultural, include current community organization systems, government subsidies and grants, leaders that manage both worlds, incorporation of other arts other than one's own, such as cultural tourism management, the revitalization of the ruca, rural and urban links and returning diaspora, diversified family economies, and community finances, the commoning of currency. These are all examples of contemporary community-led economic practices still that are existing today. And with this, I'd like to highlight the ruca as both a traditional and contemporary practice. Ruca has been a symbol of the positive reassembling of the old womb-like space with a new form of economic and political self-management. We have often referred back to the ruca as an expression of an ideal alternative economy, the central role of the fire, to which in old times was never burnt out, the importance of her inhabitants, the use of local materials and coexistence with Lago Budi's wetlands, the flexibility to adjust to wind and earthquakes and yet still remain intact, the need to renew it every other season, and in general, the love and transparency created for a home of a family. Today, this ancient architecture has also become part of contemporary economies and struggles to regain control over education, tourism, and cultural markets.
So in terms of linking back, and I'm going to try to make this short because we are running out of time. In terms of linking back to the community economies framework, which is a task we are undertaking for the last several months, we think in a quite productive way. First, I would like to point that we see an important methodological coincidence similar to the community economics framework when we first developed our approach, working closely with Mapuche colleagues and with support from our team in Oregon, led by Professor Ronald Siverson. We developed a strong focus on identifying the quote where we are at as our point of departure, or as we used to put it, focusing on assets rather than lack. By interpreting, documenting, and sharing back with the community what emerged as explicit and implicit norms, agents, and ethics shaping economic cooperation, decision-making, and leadership in the community. As already mentioned by Alison, several months of fieldwork and community dialogues during the preparatory phase enabled this research to become the foundation of a sound institutional model, still working in a full managed fashion after 6 years, while beginning to produce important impact, as was documented in our recent report. In terms of the areas of interest and practice identified in the Take Back the Economy, we believe indigenous-led co-design can enable taking back or decolonizing markets through creating and disseminating institutional innovations for encountering others in transparent and reciprocal negotiation of one another's needs, which in the case of Apoyo Mutuo includes non-monetary and monetary commitments between members, this pooling of local and external member savings, and more recently, creating a fair, in quotes, interface between community and market economies. In terms of taking back or decolonizing finances, savings and shared access have enabled members new venues for investing in the future through longer-term planning of family economies that was not available before, taking back collective financial decision-making, which we think is crucial, and community planning through a chart of strategic directions self-determined by the community. Finally, a concept we believe to be ever more central both to community economies and to the Apoyo Mutuo process is that of commoning. In one level, it has been about sharing access to financial resources, but more importantly, in our experience, it has been crucially about linking finances to the recomposition of indigenous territoriality. Apoyo Mutuo, through the lens of the Commons Identikit, for instance, let me see, has a structurally limited access to the monetary economy. Its use is negotiated by members through explicit and implicit norms for decision making. Its care is exercised by members and traditional authorities. The responsibility is of the self-management team, supported by its allies. And the property is made of individual deposits, savings, plus a guarantor / investment fund owned by the group. And crucially, the benefits of this are distributed to family economies, but also to lands, or if you like, earth others, or to use the Mapuche concept, Itrofil Mongen, or the interconnected diversity of life present in the territory, in the lof.
So overall, to begin to wrap it up and open up to conversation discussion, I would like to define 3 issues that emerge as relevant topics for conversation. That of ongoing economic innovation, the fact that the community are still on their ancestral lands, and the enormous relevance for Indigenous-led co-design processes. What we learned is that when it comes to Indigenous-led economic innovation, it is important to recognize and honor the traditional and old ways of economic dynamics, but it is also important to acknowledge the need for Indigenous lands and communities to address and confront globalization and resource extraction and all that comes with this confrontation. In this post-colonial context, they are often pushed and encouraged to create innovative responses to be able to balance out their monetary and non-monetary assets to strive for well-being. Which leads me to the second main point on what we have learned, which is that this community is still living on and within their community ancestral lands. In this sense, Indigenous land stewardship and the action of commoning have had to be quote unquote updated through a specific process of cultural appropriation of global tools in order to create survivance of economic practices. These kind of context-specific crystallizations of community economies have created enormous potential for mutual learning through Indigenous-led co-design. And now I'd like to invite you to join us on the third point, our vision in this creation of a hub or a place of what we were inspired by Latour's Terrestre in his Down to Earth book. In concrete, for instance, Indigenous cultural centers are now widely recognized as innovative and important sites of community engagement. What if we were to apply the same spatial concept to alternative community economies, that just as local economies are being reshaped, perhaps Indigenous-led economic hubs or centers and all that Indigenous ways of knowing and learning encompasses are becoming widely recognized as innovative and important sites of alternative economic engagement. In practice, using methodologies linked to action research became a significant approach for Indigenous-led co-design. By privileging the indigenous presence and acknowledging their continuing existence as First Nations in indigenous-led co-design, the community of Lago Budi was situated in a much more potent historical, political, and cultural context. Imagine a global network of mutual learning hubs connecting scholars and allies, such as yourselves, to indigenous-led processes into a global collective leading to renewed coexistence with Earth. Perhaps we're in the beginning phases and we would love to learn more of your experiences and your hubs. But we truly believe that this is already taking shape through CERN and other networks.
Okay, so we wanted to share a second video about Apoyo Mutuo's ongoing efforts to support agroecology as a way to recuperate indigenous territoriality. Before we do that, I wanted to also refer to a very grounding process that serves as an example of basically how these processes of learning have ensued within Apoyo Mutuo. It was during the second annual cycle when the discussion, a discussion erupted on whether to support or not the purchase of chemical inputs, which many families have come to depend on for their food security. While some members argue precisely that this was the only available way to achieve food security and avoid out-migration, others were upset about using their savings, right, to support practices that damage the loves y trophy monien. The agreement reached, including putting a cap on financing going for these chemical inputs, but also taking collective responsibility to actually find the alternatives needed through an agroecological transition. So here we also wanted to quote Nadia's words, thoughts that she shared with us in an interview last year. She says, as our lands heal, we are also healing. I'm not sure if we have time for an 8-minute video, or Alison, what do you think? There's the link, but I'm not sure what to.
Perhaps we can go ahead and finish, and then we show the video if people are interested, and then we go back.
Okay.
Because we're finishing right now.
Yeah.
For the discussion,
Okay.
to open up for discussion.
Okay. So yeah, we are. It's only we have these final points for discussion. Two questions similar to those that we have in the invitation, probably more synthetic. One is, could indigenous-led co-design in balancing monetary and non-monetary values serve as a model for diverse communities to reorient money to land-based economies through this market-community interface? And second is, can leadership of First Nation and land-based communities be highlighted at a global scale through this networked co-designing of working models for decolonizing economies? So these were the questions we were hoping to open up, also to your experiences, right? We have 15 minutes left. I don't know if you want to use half of that in a second video. The video is really nice to sort of ground the stuff that we've been talking about. So maybe we should take, what do you think, Anna? Take 8 minutes?
Actually, my thinking is that maybe we can use that time to exchange with people, since probably the video people can watch it later. And because there are some comments on the side about, for example, a glossary that has been done in Asia. Jenny Cameron put that comment, and also Jenny was commenting about the framing of taking back as in relationship to decolonizing that you showed in your slide. That's an interesting comment as well. So maybe, and also since Nadia is here, hola Nadia, Marie, Mari Langmien, right? Did I get it right? So, Mari. Incheana Inés.
Incheta Nadia Painfil Piñén.
Gracias. Entonces, no sé, si a usted le parece, podemos usar el tiempo para el exchange, maybe, if you think it's okay with you guys. And if Nadia quiere decir algo, or whatever.
La mía Nadia, por favor, si quiere compartir algún pensamiento, este es el momento porque vamos a cerrar en 15 minutos. Se lo agradeceríamos.
Sí, saludarlo a todos. Estaba escuchando la presentación y viendo los videos de acá del trabajo que se ha realizado en Apoyo Mutuo todos estos años y de cómo cada día ha ido avanzando y ahora ya estamos trabajando todo lo que es el tema de la agricultura natural con toda la familia acá en la comunidad.
Chaltumay Lamien Nadia.
Chaltumay Lamien. Kumay Songu.
Ignacio, do you want to go back to the comments that were made on the chat by Jenny regarding whether someone wants to speak to the Asian glossary, or whether you or Alison would like to comment on decolonizing as taking back? I think there was also a comment by Kelly earlier on that I will look up, back to, and I will repost for you to see.
Okay. Yes, I will try to answer. I think it's both. I can answer both Jenny and Kelly in terms that effectively the Mapuche leaders have their own conceptual framework in terms of recuperating their territory and what they call itrofilmongen, which is this interconnected life systems with which they coexist in this territory. And that's basically the framework that we have also used all these years. But at the same time, we feel the urgency to somehow translate, if you like, I don't know if that's the appropriate concept, but how do we build bridges conceptually and in practice to global networks of people doing similar work and thinking about similar visions. So because I think that we basically what we share and what we have speak with them as well, and they we understand, see our role in terms of connecting and enabling their leadership, but in a process that they can not do it on their own either. I mean, it's a process that they can lead, but that they cannot lead on their own, or where we feel that the other communities, and particularly more affluent communities, should have a sense of responsibility and solidarity, because ultimately we are all benefiting of being able to recompose territories of life. But the conceptualization, again, we are now with Alison sort of developing and linking in different conceptual frameworks, such as commoning, which in Spanish would be something like comunalidad, but which is not really used at least in daily life by Mapuche leaders. They prefer their own, to use their own conceptual frameworks.
So that has been a big part of our effort, is actually to learn of these frameworks in their language. Ignacio and I have been taking classes. In the meetings, we're able to pick up maybe 70 to 80%, Ignacio more than I, but in 70 to 80% of what's being discussed. And that's also part of understanding how to work in a situation that requires careful methodologies and applying the empowerment and the voice of the communities themselves in the process.
So the other thing about the glossary, I'm not sure I understanding well, but we have also come to the realization that glossaries and language are very important to try to be precise in defining what we are talking about specifically in intercultural contexts. But I'm not sure if you are referring to an existing tool or what. I'm not sure.
Jenny, would you like to explain what your comment was, or maybe if the people who were working on that are here, they can speak to that?
I think there are people there who can speak to it. So Kelly, Catherine, Isaac, I'm not sure if Anne Hill's here, but they were involved in a project that brought together people working in different parts of Monsoon Asia, and people looked at keywords that were about community economies languages used in different parts of Monsoon Asia. But like I say, Catherine and Kelly, Isaac could certainly comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting all the questions? I feel like you guys should all just come here and we can discuss it with a cup of tea. But this is good also because we're reaching across the Pacific and the Atlantic. So, but I'm not sure we're getting all the questions. That's my concern. There was a question.
Yeah,
on...
don't worry, because I'm trying to help with that.
Okay.
Ellie says she cannot speak now because it's a bit noisy there. I'm assuming it's because of children playing there, but maybe if Isaac or someone else, Anne Hill, that I think collaborated with that Monsoon Asian glossary or bilingual work, if they want to comment on that, that'd be great. If they don't, we can keep on going, but it'd be good if you could.
I can just say that I'm going to post a link to the paper that was published. It's an open access paper. So I'll post a link to that in the discussion thread here. I mean, the paper itself was a collaboration. I think there's 26 academics listed on the paper. And each of us had to partner with a scholar from our country. So I partnered with a Cambodian academic I've been working with for a long time, and likewise, Catherine McKinnon was partnering with a with an academic from Laos, Anne Hill from the Philippines. So we were looking at keywords for diverse economies. The practices that would be under the iceberg, essentially. But I think one of the interesting points was to get a local take on concepts that we could otherwise be seen as imposing if we were not careful. So we were getting that situated sense of what these practices are and how they've been enacted for generations.
Right.
So yes, I think that was helping to mitigate to some extent, frameworks that would otherwise be imposed. So it was adhering to the principles of co-design, I guess. It was bringing to life practices that you could try and harness if you were instigating co-designed programs. I certainly found in Cambodia, the word I use, provas, I explored, this just means exchange of the heart and hand. So it fits very much with the gifting and the portfolio of gifts, but it's also a concept that was very problematically labeled social capital by the World Bank. And they wrote lots of reports about it. So I was really trying to rescue the concept and expose it in more nuanced ways, and in ways that were more open-ended, I guess. Maybe Kelly or Catherine would have something to add.
If they do, we'll be happy to hear. There's also a comment and a question by Anissa, which I will read while people get ready to talk if they want it, to add something to what Isaac just said. The question Anissa posted is, well, she first said, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and all your work. I'm wondering about the ripple effects of this project in the community and beyond, building from the sense of autonomy and claiming political subjectivity and voice.
Anissa, come on over here and we'll talk it in person. No, that's a great question. And actually that has been part of this constant evaluation of what our role as action researchers, not being from the community, what our role is in that regards, and whether we are actively participating in that impact, but at the same time, we're also observing, as you say, the ripple effects. And what we've noticed, I guess just, and I can, you know, since just from the top of my head, because that's a big question, and I think it would require further interviews and further analysis in order to really understand these specific ripple effects. So we work in the lake is huge. There's about 100 communities around the lake. We work in 3 in the southern part of the lake, which is composed of what they call a ayarewe, which is a traditional territory that's composed of 9 lofts or 9 communities, I guess. So we work in that part, and from there, these families have already, in a way, created the ripple effect. They have been on this constant struggle for recovering their education. They have the only Mapuche managed school in the region, if not the country, where they are introducing their own pedagogy and their own methodology to teach their students, because many of the kids in that region are forced to, at high school, forced to leave their homes and go to boarding school because there's no high school in the area. The closest high school is a couple of hours away. So to wake up, you know, anyways, so there's certain struggles in that. They also are implementing a self-managed tourism managed by the families where, and this is world renowned, people from all over go there and get to be introduced to the Mapuche culture while experiencing the beauty of the lake. And then they have done other forms of self-management. They took over their own water system. And there's a certain other list also, that community organization, tree nurseries. So from there, we came into already a context that was already creating the ripple effect. And basically the self-management of economies became kind of one more to this collective process that they were already engaged in. That said, it turned out that while the project began with a focus on financial, monetary, non-monetary assets and managing of these assets, it evolved as it began to take life. It evolved to become an important space to speak and to dialogue priorities that the communities would like for the future. And that's where the strategic directions came up and were born. And from there, all these other projects began to evolve, like with regards to water catchment systems and agroecology. And so basically the neighbors, the communities are eyeing and are observing what these communities are doing. And the neighbors in themselves are also doing their own thing. So I think what's happening is not so much of a centralized ripple effect, like throwing a petal in the ocean or in the lake and it ripples from that petal. I think there are multiple petals happening all at once, and we're just one kind of part of that agency. I think that there's, for example, communications. People are wanting to practice more the use of documenting through videography. And there's, on the other side of the lake, there are women that are gathering to create these beautiful basket artisan links and recovering the wetlands. So it's kind of all like there's like a phenomena happening, I guess, and we would call it like multiple ripple effects. And I think Ignacio wanted to compliment on that, but that would be my first reaction.
Very briefly before I pass it to Anna and to close it, said that a little bit contradictory to what Alison says, although it's absolutely truth, but the Apoyo Mutuo and the possibility of replicating somehow some of these processes has been a slower process than what we initially thought, and truly we have come to understand that community timing and rhythms are different, very different than project and development times and deadlines and so on. So we are a little bit trying to manage that and, keep respecting the community times, and they take all the time. They have all the time in the world, because what they cannot afford is to make mistakes and damage the, further the social tissue. So that would be my 2 cents, and I would like to pass it to Ana Eras, who I think might help us close this, which is the last session of Liviana.
Gracias. Sí, más que cerrar, more than closing, because this is opening up more and more. Maybe I would like to say a couple of words about, first of all, thanking you for being here and presenting your work. It's been very nice, although I'm very familiar with the work. Every time I hear your thoughts, something new comes from me. So that's very nice, and thank you. Also, thank all the people who are here today, because it's very nice to see how generous people are in sharing their thoughts, ideas, comments, and people seem to be very open and have been very open, I think, during the Liviana conference, which is very good to see as well. And maybe a thought that comes to my mind is that the Liviana has sprung so many things. In Argentina is spring now, and this morning I woke up to one of my plants giving flowers, and that was so amazing that I was thinking about that coincidence with this flower coming up and this process we've been through in Liviana of opening up and sharing and pollinizing, or pollinization, I'm not sure what the word in English would be, but what bees do. And I think it's very nice to see that process, because it's in process. And that's why I also was saying that maybe it's not closing, but opening. Also,
Anna, I think you're muted.
Sí. Quise apretar otra cosa y apreté eso. I'm posting a word, which is Marichuel, and I'm sure that people from the community know what that means, and it has a sense of strength. Tiene mucha fuerza esa palabra, mucho poder, y es la palabra para reconectarnos y para saber que estamos en la lucha y que estamos siempre pensando cómo transformar el mundo. We're in the struggle. We want to transform the conditions in which we live, and I think we're all, at least in this space, communicating to make that happen. So I have posted that word, Marichuo, in a sign of respect for the processes of the Mapuche-Lafkenche community and also yourselves presenting today, Alison and Ignacio. And with that, I say goodbye and I say thank you once again. Muchas gracias y nos seguimos viendo. We'll keep on connecting and seeing ourselves. Si alguien
Thank
quiere
you,
decir
Ana.
algo más,
Thank you.
if there's anybody who would like to say a word or an emotion that they want to say, just one word, pop it out and just we can start closing, as we said.
Beautiful, inspiring. Thank you so much. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, Anissa. Hasta pronto.
Heartful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao, Tamai.
Marichihuevo.
Sorry, that's my egg.
Gracias, entonces. Vamos cerrando. Tanto más.
Gracias. Chartu,
I think
Chartu Maya.
Byron, I think you want to say something.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Ron.
Yeah. No, was I saying something? No, this was fabulous. Thank you so much. I direct Maple, but I want to just let people know that Alison, Ignacio, and the communities have done this in a very local, situated way, and it's just amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone.
Let's keep
Thank
in
you,
touch.
Ron. Let's keep in touch. Gracias. Bye-bye. We'll be seeing
Gracias.
you.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Peu callar.
Chao, Lamien, Peu Callar, Lamien Nadia.
Ciao, Tamai.